Greetings and salutations. This is Abdelhadi with the Bitter Truth. Well, me may not have all the answers, but we're going to ask an awful lot of questions. You can also help us out on the show by visiting the bittertruth.info, INFO. And there you can join the Patreon page or buy some fabulous swag to make your life better, or just donate to the show one time if you want to. Whatever helps us out is great because, as you probably know at this point, we don't really take advertising. Today, my guest is Dr. Joseph Jarvis. I'm going to call him Dr. Joe for the familiarity of it all. But he's the author of The Purple World and the forthcoming The Herd of My People. He's an MD. He's out of Salt Lake City, Utah, and has been in practice for quite a while and has some really interesting ideas about the current healthcare system. And I'm excited to have him on today. How you doing, man?
I'm great. Thank you for having me, Abe.
Hey, thanks for coming on. I appreciate you really coming on. So let's just jump into it. I watched the one video that you have on YouTube, and I gotta be honest with you. You've got to be getting suppressed because when I saw that it only had like this is a year and a half ago now, and it only had about like 240 views, and the content is like really good, and you're not a boring guy, so like I got to think you're getting suppressed or something, man.
Yeah, it's absolutely the case that people who talk about health system reform from a non-market perspective are not favored by the powers that be, whoever they are.
Sure. CIA tube or, MSCIA or whatever one. I mean, it's just one big corporate gangbang these days. So initially you're talking about when you're talking about access to better healthcare. Like when you talk about that as a bullet point, what do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean by that is financial access. Everybody should be able to afford the care that they need. And the reason is simple. Americans tax themselves more for healthcare than do the citizens of any other country in the world, bar none. So we're already paying for healthcare that's medically necessary in a timely fashion, high quality. We're already paying for that.
Right.
So why don't we all have it?
Right.
That's the point that I keep trying to make to people. Why don't we already have this?
Yeah. No. And the point I always make to people, especially, I used to say conservatives, but these days, the Democrats are just blue Republicans, and they seem to toe the same corporate line. They'll say things like, "Well, I have a friend who was in Canada and they had to wait like a month for their MRI," like some anecdotal crap, right? Compared to, what we spend. And I always tell them, you guys you're paying 5 times. You're paying your taxes. Right? You're paying into your Medicare, your contribution, then you pay into your premium, then you have your ever expanding copays, and then what they deny. So you're paying 5 times. I knew a guy last fall that had COVID with Blue Cross from his job, and he came out of the hospital with $106,000 in bills.
Medical bankruptcy, that's the most common pathway to bankruptcy in the United States. And that most of the people who go bankrupt because of illness or injury costs were insured at the time the illness or injury occurred.
Sure.
Insurance is the most wasteful, useless way to finance healthcare ever invented. And it is what we in the United States, for some reason, 75 years after it was really created, we're still depending on, even though it fails us over and over again.
Sure.
I have some about why that might be the case, but it's absolutely sickening that we keep watching the same thing play out over generations and generations. It's just stupid.
Why don't you hit on a couple of those points of why that may be the case?
Well, first of all, politically, the elephant in the room here, and I don't mean just the Republican elephant, as you already. Politically, these people who own and operate health insurance are receiving trillions of dollars a year and shaving off 25, 30% off the top for profits. And therefore they have lots of money to play the political game. Mm-hmm. What they write, this is not my words. This is the words of a former health insurance executive, Wendell Potter, who finally turned out, and began whistleblowing about that whole industry. What they write in their corporate boardrooms in the morning is on the tongues of our congressmen that afternoon. They control the conversation about health system policy. They control what's voted on, what even gets to committee hearing. And that's not just in Congress. That's at every single legislature across the nation. I've lobbied for health system reform in 3 states in the West, Nevada, Utah, Colorado.
Wow.
And I've been close and personal with people who are members of the legislature. I was twice nominated as a Republican in Utah to run for the Utah state legislature. So I think I know this game pretty well.
Sure.
You do even just a minor change in the way they do business with, let's say, a bill in the Utah legislature, and I've done this, so I know how this works, and you go lobby one person trying to get a committee vote for your bill, within 15 steps after you have that contact, health insurance lobbyist will approach and try to turn that vote the other way.
Wow.
They absolutely control what goes on. That's the biggest elephant in the room. It's a heavy political lift to change the business model that we currently use for financing healthcare, because they're protecting these vast amounts of profit that they make year in. It's profiteering is the best way to put it.
Sure.
Because they're rent seekers. They're rent seekers. What I mean by that, add no value to the overall mix. They have nothing to give us. They don't organize good healthcare. In fact, far from it. They don't protect us financially from, like insurance is supposed to do, from an untoward outcome.
That's right.
They do nothing except extract money out of the revenue stream.
Right.
Now, one of the other reasons why this doesn't go anywhere politically is the rest of the business community, which ought to be on our side. They keep complaining about what high health costs are doing to their bottom line. Right. They ought to be helping us, but they don't, because 75 years ago, at the end of World War II, a measure that was put in place during the war to prevent inflation due to wage increases, that capped wages, provided large employers with the opportunity to provide a health benefit with a tax credit from the federal government to defray the cost. That's so they could attract the women who were at home and not in uniform into the workplace and build all that war material that was needed for the war effort.
Right.
75 years ago, at the end of the war, all of the other measures related to preventing inflation during the war were rescinded. We went back to status quo, except that one.
Right.
That credit remained in place. All these people who are in the health insurance industry who keep saying, anything other than what we do is socialized medicine, are failing to tell the American people that what they do is dependent on that now $500 billion a year tax credit support that they get from the federal government.
That's right.
And the rest of the employers, the rest of the business community, the large ones anyway, who take advantage of that tax credit, realize that what it gets them is fear in the employment base, in all those employees, so that they don't leave those jobs when in fact they would be better off seeking something else. Maybe they could be more entrepreneurial. Maybe they have a new career to pursue. Maybe they could get better education. Maybe they could, the job lock that's involved with that tax credit is what the employers find so beneficial and why they don't help us out, trying to get rid of this ridiculous, useless way of paying for healthcare.
Well, you said this a second ago. So you were running for legislature as a Republican, right?
Right.
Okay. So I know a few conservative business owners. My day job is I deal with businesses, and the few that I know well enough to chat with this crap about, strangely enough, are conservative, and strangely enough, know that 2 + 2 is 4. So when they're looking at a 100 life group and they're paying $1 million to $1.5 million a year, which is like their number 2 cost behind payroll for insurance, they're like, yeah, if we had Medicare, shit, I'd be able to add $1 million after my bottom line and give everybody a 4 to 5 figure raise, because now they're not paying for premiums.
Take a look at it from the back of the envelope sort of calculation. Mm-hmm. We're going to spend $4 trillion on healthcare in the United States. Close to $3 trillion of that comes from public revenues. Medicaid, CHIP, Indian Health Service, VA Medical Center, TRICARE, all the health benefits for public employees at all levels, federal, state, local. Often that's the piece that people fail to calculate in when they talk about how 150 million people are getting private employment health benefits and they don't want it disturbed. They're forgetting that a large number of that 150 million people are public employees whose health benefit is paid by taxation.
Right.
You add all those taxes together. And, we're forgetting about the Obamacare supplements and what we do to pay for all that. I haven't even begun to name all the acronym soup of federal and state public programs paid by the taxpayer. You add all that up together, you're approaching $3 trillion of that $4 trillion.
Wow.
Most of the money in healthcare is public money. We tax ourselves enough to have the most expensive healthcare system in the world without that extra trillion that comes out of private pockets, increasingly out of the individual patient's pocket at the point of service, when they can least afford it and have no ability to actually be able to affect what that transaction is. They never get a bargain, right? They're totally unable to actually do anything.
Right.
So if we did away with that $1 trillion and just simply paid for it publicly, preserved all the revenues, the tax revenues we currently have, but we insisted on a more efficient way of paying for it than the health insurance business model, and we actually did a better job of providing the care with better primary care, better prevention, more cooperation in trauma care, a variety of other things that we don't have time probably to go through. If we did a better job, it's very possible to do, and had a more efficient system, we would actually be able to have higher quality care for every single American at the point they needed it, that's medically necessary, without raising another dollar in taxes.
Well, see, and that's the thing is, like, I mean, I've seen the metrics and some of the actuarials, especially in 2016 when Bernie was running. He put out a bunch of reports, right? His campaign did anyway. And to see that my taxes would go up a whole 0.3% or half a percentage point, good. I'm also a big fan of daycare, right? Pre-K daycare. I don't have any kids, at least not that I know of, and I would like to have daycare. I don't know why a family has to be burdened with a $20,000 to $30,000 a year daycare bill, just to go to work. It's like, why don't we? Every other industrialized country in the world, and I've seen your video like 3 times. Every other industrialized country in the world, and of course yours was strictly medical, but all those metrics that we're talking about, like, they handle that, and that's the bang you get for your taxpayer buck.
Right. If you do it well. Now, one thing I'd point out about the Sanders approach to health system reform, he's putting forward what he refers to as Medicare for all, or maybe he calls it approved Medicare for all, which is a national single payer. And he doesn't have to raise money in order to get to that amount, because he forgets about the fact that the states actually are raising taxes for healthcare, and by making it Medicare for all, he's not tapping into that. That's about a $700 to $800 billion a year amount. If you could keep that flow going and keep it included in the system, you don't need to raise taxes. Well, that's my back of the envelope calculation, and I have not done some kind of major economic analysis to prove I'm right about that. Maybe someday I'll get that done.
Well, I mean, I don't know how much of an analysis you need to do when the result of what we have right now is absolute shit.
Yeah.
I mean, like I would take your analysis on the back of an envelope over a beer right now over what we have now, which is a failure.
We have a rising percentage of the gross national product that's given to healthcare year in and year out.
Right.
We're at about 20% of the GDP going to healthcare. The rest of the first world is somewhere around, half that as the percent of GDP.
Right.
My former governor here in Utah and the former Secretary of Health and Human Services once said, there will not be a nation in the leader on the leaderboard internationally that spends 25% of its GDP on healthcare. Why? Because when you spend $1 on healthcare, you can't spend it on anything else. Sure. There's only a % of the GDP. There's not more than that.
Right.
So the more you give to healthcare, the less you have for anything else.
That's right.
And your childcare and your education and your streets and roads and your sewers, everything that we do publicly, that goes to health because you're spending it on a healthcare system that's profiteering off of it and actually not providing a high quality product.
Well, and then kind of to piggyback on that, I don't want to get too far into the weeds here. We only have a little bit of time, but that's the elephant in the room, though, is everything you're talking about. And, this is what Eisenhower warned us about in 1961 when he left office, was that, and he called it, he changed it to the last minute, but it was originally called the Congressional Military Industrial Complex. You took congressional out because you want to indict the Congress, which I thought you should have. But regardless, the point of all this is the elephant in the room now is that $1.2 trillion military bill, war bill, right? If we spent half of that, we'd still outspend the Chinese by 3 times, the Russians by 7. The Russians spend up $80 billion a year on defense. They have healthcare and they have college. And I know you're a little bit older than me, but not by a whole lot. And I don't know where you went to school, but I went to state school and it was free. And junior college was free.
Yeah, right? We've lost our way on all.
I was going to say that. That's a great phrase. We lost our way. For some reason, people look at me like I want a pony when I say, hey, I went to JC for free. And they're like, huh?
Well, Eisenhower, glad you mentioned him. I believe him to be the last true conservative who held the office of president. And his predecessors, who are Republicans, who were true conservatives, who actually brought forward things that actually made a difference for the American people, people like Teddy Roosevelt, Ulysses Grant, and Abraham Lincoln.
Well, even FDR, what he did was for the American people. And even Eisenhower, when he was challenged on, are you going to get rid of the New Deal? He's like, are you crazy? I remember the Depression.
Yeah.
I remember when we had a depression. I remember when people had no unemployment. I remember when people had no Social Security. I remember that. I remember bread lines. I'm not going to do that.
Republicans do not hate government. True Republicans want government to be sized appropriately, and they want the governmental functions to be distributed, between the federal and the state governments and the local governments in an appropriate way. They make arguments about that, but they do not hate government. They embrace it. They love it. They want it. They know that there needs to be balance in our communities. And that's how we do it. That's what we do together. They like doing big things. And we do big things together, not individually.
Well, and to your point, like you made a point a second ago, and I'm talking about pre-pandemic, right? Because you're talking about the current Obamacare system, which is basically a Heritage Foundation right-wing talking point. Mitt Romney did it in Massachusetts. Obama, everything he campaigned on, he lied about. I mean, he got in with the back room, and we got ACA by 2010. Which is a piece of crap program. He
made his deal with the health insurance industry between the time he was elected and the time he was sworn in.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
He made his deal with the health insurance.
Made his deal. That's right. But because pre-pandemic, we're averaging 50,000 deaths a year for lack of coverage, right? And like you said a second ago, bankruptcies, specifically, that number is about 1 million a year of bankruptcies. And this is what I tell people all the time that like rave about Obamacare. I got friends on Obamacare. And they'll say, oh, it's awesome. I got a physical. Okay, try getting sick on Obamacare. Okay, yeah. Because when I tried pricing Obamacare, you're looking at an $8,000 deductible. Now, if I'm sick for 20 months, let's say I got cancer or some disease or something, and I'm sick for, let's just say 20 months. That goes into 1 year and then a full year and then 6 months into the next year. Now I'm in the hole $25,000 on medical expenses.
Right.
I might have to bankrupt or go into my savings, right? That's why we have 1 million bankruptcies a year. And 52% of collections in this country are medical.
Right.
Right. So all of that to say, when these people rave about Obamacare, I'm like, it's a capitalist structure. It's designed to make money for a middleman. And again, the privatization of we've privatized everything else in this country, haven't we?
Yeah. So it was called the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. Right. And there's not a single patient that's been protected, and it's
goddamn not affordable. $800 a month. I mean, seriously, I'm on a health share plan, right? Because I'm 1099, so I'm on a health share plan, and I pay about $300 a month for this thing, and it works ish. I mean, I haven't been screwed yet, but they take forever to reimburse you. And every time I talk to them, I'm like, listen, if I get really sick, what's going to happen? Like I'm just talking about getting paid, from my chiropractor. Like, what's going to happen if I get really sick? You guys pay 120 days out. I don't know anybody that waits 90 days. So that means I got to go to my credit cards, my savings. Am I going to have to bankrupt if I get sick? And they swear up and down, no. We just got overwhelmed because of COVID and people lost their jobs and they needed coverage and they couldn't afford Cobra, right? That's the big excuse. But I mean, this is the level of coverage we have in this country. It's like, no matter what it says in the brochure, it's just, and
by the way, this is another reason why we're having such a hard time with the political lift. The vast majority of people out there who have private health insurance don't realize how bad it is because they're they're cooking along, feeling reasonably well. They're not using it. It's only those who actually face a crisis.
Try getting sick. Yeah.
Suddenly discover, you know what? It's worthless.
Try getting sick. Yeah.
They let me go see the doctor I need to go see. I can't go to the hospital I need to be in. If I can get there, then I get a surprise bill that's incredibly large because why? Not everybody at the hospital is actually part of the plan.
Right.
So it goes on. And then if you fail to report some small thing when you actually apply for the policy and you become a big expense for the health insurance industry, they'll claim that you were falsifying your application and they'll risk your policy. They have all kinds of tricks and they'll use everything from they're in the benefit denial business. They are not in help people get well business. That's
and this is what's so frustrating in this country with all the access that we have. I can't tell you how many times I've seen like testimony from former executives in front of the Congress, talking about my job was to deny claims. My job, if I was going to get a bonus that year, I had to, keep it to this much. They're testifying to this under oath. And yet people look at me like I'm cross-eyed when I go, yeah, our system sucks. And then they'll give you some anecdotal crap they saw on Fox News, right? Or MSNBC. And they'll say, well, you had to wait for a brain. Okay. First of all, people in this country wait for a brain scan. That's 100%. I got veteran friends, and people love to confuse the VA with Medicare. And the VA is a provider model, and Medicare is a paying model. And there's a big difference with that, which is why, like you just said, you just got on Medicare, right?
I did.
Okay. So
I'm just 55. And I'm glad for that. But I would have to say that it's, we should stop talking about Medicare for all. We should start definitely saying we have to improve this. It's expensive. It involves, and one of the biggest things that's going on in Medicare right now is the Medicare Advantage fiasco.
Oh, that is a scam and a half.
It's a scam that's just getting worse.
Listen, if anyone doesn't want to get in all the ugliness and look it up for themselves, I'll just spare you the details. Medicare Advantage is like the car warranty program that the nice lady from Korea has been calling you about for the last 3 years. That's exactly what it is. It's a shank of a, and if you notice this Build Back Better crap that Biden just signed left out vision and dental, but they left in hearing, which is cheap. So they're going to put hearing into Medicare, but not dental or vision, right? Which if you look at dental insurance, it's crap anyway. I don't know any dental plan that gives you more than a couple of grand a year. If you need more than your teeth cleaned or something, you're going to end up coming out of pocket quick.
Yeah. If you've got a kappa tooth, you're going to exceed that. And so you're out.
Excuse me, 100%.
Yeah, you're out.
100%.
And the dental issues, which you should not be separated from the rest of the body, are so key. So many people's health is, ruined by the poor state of their dental health.
Right.
I guess what we've decided is it's okay for us to have senior citizens who have no teeth.
But that's the issue when you make a business out of everything, because not everything's a business.
Yeah.
Not everything's a business. I mean, I'm in business. My day job, I'm in sales. My job is to make money. I get it. But not everything is supposed to be a business.
Well, you make my point, both in the video and in this piece that I'm about to have published in the Salt Lake Tribune, which is that market forces, which we in the United States have dearly loved forever and ever, don't work in every situation. And healthcare, where they simply don't work.
Right.
None of the that Adam Smith identified when he published Wealth of Nations in 1776, none of those prerequisites are true of healthcare. We don't have a buyer who can beware. No caveat emptor. We have a patient, not a buyer, not a shopper, not a customer.
Right.
We have somebody who often is debilitated and maybe completely incapacitated who cannot shop and needs to be cared for. It's an entirely they simply don't know what they need to know in order to make any kind of decisions. We have a seller of health services who, unlike a market, cannot look out for him or herself first and foremost. Sellers in a market should be in the market to try to make as much money as possible. That's all they're there to do. But we tell our nurses, you have a professional, ethical obligation to the patient. Their needs come first, not yours. If you stop having that professional, ethical obligation, you have ruined healthcare. You no longer patient-physician relationship that good healthcare requires. Number 3, every transaction in a market has to matter to no one except the buyer and the seller. There can be any other interested parties, but every single transaction in healthcare matters to every one of us. And it's not just because there's communicable diseases. Of course, we want the active tuberculosis case to be found, treated, and brought under control, because the rest of us are at risk as long as they're wandering the streets. But that's only the beginning of it. If you want good trauma care, you have to organize it around a particular group of doctors and nurses in a particular center, and everyone else has to cooperate with them. So every case gets there as quickly as possible, because that's how it's best done. That's true of all high-tech services, intensive care, open heart surgery, neonatal services. I don't care which one you look at. It's got to be regionally, cooperatively delivered so that it's the practice of the care is refined, and those people are always sharp so that when you need it, it's ready for you.
Right.
And then finally, markets have prices that are related inversely to demand. The higher the price, the lower the demand in a market. And inverse, the lower the price, the higher the demand. That simply isn't true in healthcare. Demand in healthcare is determined by epidemiology, the frequency of a disease or an injury, not by anything else. I'm not a diabetic. I don't care how low you price insulin. I will never buy it. I don't need it. I don't want it. Same for chemotherapy. Until I have cancer, I don't care how low you price it. I don't care if you want to give it to me. I don't want it. I will not take it. So there is no, demand, inverse demand there. That's right. True of open heart surgery.
Right. I don't want one.
Worth what, $1,000 now? You take $100,000 surgery and say to somebody on the street, I'll give it to you for free. Come on into the hospital right now. Let's crack your chest. How many people take that up? Okay. Nobody. It doesn't happen because it's on sale. It just doesn't happen.
I got an appendectomy on sale.
Market forces will never solve problems. We've got to stop thinking that way.
Yeah.
It's got to be done cooperatively with the patient foremost. That's the only way to make this happen. And everything that has to do with competition and market, we got to get rid of that. It's got to be open and done.
Right. Well, and to your point, that you make an excellent point, because it is not a free market thing. Like thankfully I'm not sick. I'm in good health, but I don't want an appendectomy if it's free. I don't want any of that shit. Even when I go get my physical once a year and I get my blood drawn, I don't like it. It's like I just got to deal with it, or I get my prostate checked. He puts the rubber glove on and goes, "Don't worry, my friends, this will only hurt a little." And he, gets up in there, and it's not as bad as the comedians make it out to be. It's usually about 15 seconds unless you're dating. But the thing is, I don't want that. I don't want that. If I don't have to do it, I don't want it. So when I work with a couple of guys, and one guy said, well, to your point, he goes, well, if, just picture if I'm a plumber and I say, hey, listen, for the X amount, I'm going to come in and fix your sink. But then I told you that for the same amount of money, I'll redo your floors. And then for the same amount of money, even if you don't need it, I'm going to do your cabinets, and you agreed to all that. Well, now it's going to cost the government more money. Well, an appendectomy is not new floors. Right. I would like new floors for free. That'd be awesome. And new cabinets, awesome. But I don't want cancer. I don't want my chest cracked. I don't want any of that stuff. Despite the fact that you're going to give it to me, that's cool if I need it when I need it. This is why everything is not a business. And in this country, we have privatized everything.
Yeah. So when we pretend in healthcare that market forces are going to do magical things for us, what we do is we set up a perverse set of incentives. And perverse incentives actually make it so that the most money can be made with poor quality care delivered inefficiently. That's the conundrum that we've created. So an example of that, which I think I included in my YouTube talk, is a small hospital in central Utah where a family doctor I know, a friend of mine, was practicing a few years ago. And he realized just from being there in the town and shoulder to shoulder with patients, because it's a small town, he realized that community-acquired pneumonia wasn't being appropriately treated. It wasn't diagnosed quickly enough. It wasn't handled well. And so too many people were getting sicker than they needed to be. And some people were dying from it. So he went to all of his colleagues with a proposal. He had a guideline that he wanted to set up. This is how we're going to treat somebody who might have community-acquired pneumonia.
Right.
got all the physicians in town to buy off on it. They would all follow the guideline. Then he went to the hospital administrator. He got him to buy off on it because there were some things that the hospital had to do to make this better care happen. And they invoked this new guideline at the start of a year, 15 or so years ago. So January 1st. And you can see in their statistics that the rate of hospitalization dropped. If you had to be hospitalized for pneumonia, the number of days you had to stay in the hospital dropped. So in other words, the cases were identified earlier, so they weren't as sick. The actual cost per case of pneumonia dropped in half. This is a huge success.
Sure.
Unfortunately, for the hospital, their reimbursement for cases of pneumonia dropped by more than that half. So they took a financial hit. Why? Because if you want to make real money taking care of people with pneumonia, let them get sick enough to get in the ICU. Then you make bank. So if you're a for-profit hospital and your administrator sees that data, what do you think he's going to do about it? Is he going to, hey, let's figure out how to do that with every kind of care? No. They would rather make a sale than take care of a patient. That's the incentive I'm talking about. That's exactly where we're at. Hospital administrators do not have a fiduciary duty to the patients. They have a fiduciary duty to their stockholders.
Right.
If they fail to make as much money as possible, they are liable under law for that failure. And they certainly will get fired over that. But no one can ever sue a hospital administrator for malpractice. That has to be reserved for a doctor who's left, or a nurse who's left swimming in a system that doesn't care about patients. It cares about sales.
That's right.
That is the heart of the problem right there.
Well, and that's why we have the most expensive system with the worst outcomes in the industrialized world.
Right.
I mean, this is not right. And this is what really blows my mind with people that I know that have traveled, that have been to other places, that have seen how it works. And then you come here and they're going, well, we have the best care no, we don't. We might have some of the best systems, some of the best doctors, but we don't have the best access to it. It's like if I sold you a Lamborghini for $12, but it's missing two axles and an engine, well, that's not a deal, is it?
Yeah, and also you're going to be charged $2 million to have its oil changed. Okay, right. That you're just done. You're just done.
Yeah,
and we are increasingly we're dying not just from lack of financing, but we have injuries. Preventable injuries to hospitalized patients, which are somewhere between 240,000 and 440,000 Americans a year. I mean, transpose that risk onto the airline industry as a comparison. If you did that, if you took that rate of injury and that poor safety record and put it on airplanes, what you would see is multiples of airplanes full of passengers falling out of the sky every day. How long do you think the American public would put up with that?
Right.
And yet put up with that because we've known about this since the 1990s. We've known about patient safety since the 1990s. Why do we keep putting up with it? Again, because the average American can see the news about the airplane that fell out in the sky, but nobody ever puts the news up about how many people died in the local hospital.
And why is that? And why is that? That's because Pfizer and Aetna and everybody else pays for advertising on corporate media.
You cannot, I mean, those reports have come out regularly and they never get covered. Just like discussions like we're having about how to really transform the healthcare system get suppressed. Why? Because, the newspaper wants to sell ads. And who buys them? Just like who buys the politicians?
Right.
It's the medical industrial complex does that.
Well, and to your point, you can correct me if I'm wrong. And this is old. I read this probably about a year ago. But the number 3 cause of death in this country behind heart attacks and cancer is contact with the health industry. Yeah,
that's actually the data I'm referring to.
Okay.
If you're in the range of 400,000 deaths a year, heart disease is 600,000 deaths a year. Cancer just short of 600,000 deaths per year. So if you're at 400,000 deaths per year, you're number 3, right behind heart disease and cancer.
Right.
Because the below it is like a lung disease, chronic lung disease, something like that, or accidents, and that's in the range of 100,000 deaths per year. Okay.
Do you think that's because do you think that's because of what you just said a second ago? Do you think that contact with the health industry being a top 5 cause of death in this country, do you think that's because of what you just said, where the administrators are running the show and the actual administrators of care, such as yourself or nurses or guys like my brother, like those people are not allowed to practice medicine. Instead, they're being dictated to by a bunch of sales clerks.
Well, they're being hemmed in by policies that are created in these facilities.
Yeah.
Those policies exist primarily to enrich the facility. Like I said, the fiduciary duty for the management of a for-profit entity, and increasingly that's what we have in healthcare in the United States, are for-profit entities. Their job is to make as much money as possible. They're all focused on that. When you watch a nurse in the ICU, you watch what she does. A lot of what she does is collect information for the bill. She's grabbing stickers off of every single thing that she puts into use, every IV tube, every saline solution, every antibiotic she hangs. Every time she takes a sticker off that device, sticks it on her gown, and then eventually she has to get to the charts and put all those stickers where they can be counted up. That's where you get all of the $10 for aspirin tablet bills that people complain about when they actually take the time to look at their hospital bill.
Sure.
It's the nurse who are spending all that time actually doing billing work and not actually caring for patients.
Right.
That is the problem. So, and they also downsize and dumb down the labor force in the hospitals. Why? Medicine is a labor-intensive enterprise. Labor is the most expensive thing on their bottom line. They try to make sure that the nurse, the RN, the one that's most expensive, actually does less and less, and there's fewer and fewer of them. And they hire more and more people who really not adequately trained to be at the bedside. When my wife had surgery once, and this is one thing I tell everybody that I know: never let your loved one be alone in the hospital. Never. Let my wife, after surgery, be alone. I go and stay the night with her. I make sure I'm there to observe. And the reason was one of the times when she'd had surgery, she started developing what looked like heart failure. And one of the things that you have to do is count I's and O's, ins and outs. You have to actually know how much fluid is going in, and you have to count how much is coming out. You got to figure out where it's all going. And if it's not, so you change your treatment when I found that the bedside person taking care of her didn't know how to do addition. They couldn't actually do I's and O's. They couldn't actually write the numbers down and make sense out of them. That's how bad it was in that particular for-profit hospital. This was an aide, a person who was hired as a health aide, very low, probably minimum wage kind of. And I don't fault that person.
No. I get you.
Good. They were, but that is not the way you do business in post-op settings for someone like my wife, for patients like my wife. That's just wrong.
Wow.
It wasn't that way when I was being trained 40 years ago.
Well, and I mean, you talk to millennials now, and I hate to sound like my dad, but like I sit there and I'm like, Jesus Christ, when I was a kid, it's like, because we lost our way. This country has genuinely lost its way. And like Malcolm X warned us about, the job, the successful, or the job of the media is to convince the oppressed. The oppressors are the good guys.
Yeah.
Right. And you got people telling you, oh, well, you're not, if you don't like it, leave. No, dickhead. I was born here. I was born and raised in LA. I like living here. I may retire in Vietnam because of dickheads like you. However, I have a right to say something, and I do like living here. And we used to do it better.
We used to be able to do big things.
Yeah, 100%.
Get together, no matter where we were from or, what the color of our skin was. We used to be able to get together and do something together.
Yeah.
Get it done.
Yeah.
That has gone. That is so far gone.
It's become the way of profit. I mean, to your point, the insurance industry runs a 28% overhead compared to, say, Medicare, which runs a 3% overhead. Now, if you did it statewide, like for example, Washington State is trying to get a Medicare passed in Washington, right? If they did that, and California is like the 6th largest economy in the world, they could totally do that. Texas, we could do that here in Texas, and they don't do it, and they won't do it because they're paid to not do it. They're paid to be dumb on purpose.
So all of what we've been talking about so far, I cover in the book, The Purple World. Okay. But the new book that I'm going to come out with next year, For the Hurt of My People, is going to be about how it is the case that our divisions in our country, where we're at each other's throats and seem to hate each other, is in part caused by this very poor care and treatment we have for each other. People are feeling like they're paying into the system, quote unquote, and not getting anything back. And that is absolutely true when it comes to the healthcare system. We're paying into it and we're not getting back what we should. They're feeling abandoned. Why are so many rural people, hating the urban people? Because they feel like out in rural America, most of the hospitals are, well, I shouldn't say most, but many of the hospitals are closing.
Mm-hmm.
And if not totally closing, then partially closing.
Yeah.
Therefore, when their baby has to be delivered, they've got to drive 50 miles instead of 10.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that means that the baby's at risk, and so is the mother. And what happens? Neonatal mortality rises there. Yep. Maternal mortality rises there.
Yep.
If you have pain or you're suffering in some way, you can't find someone to help you. You get sold a bill of goods because people would rather make a sale than take care of a patient. Right. And they overdose you with opioids and you become addicted to them. This is all part of the corporate strategy.
Well, and as a result, I've been to Cuba. Okay. People hate when I bring up Cuba, but fuck you. I'm going to talk about Cuba. Cuba has a lower infant mortality rate than we do. Average male lives to 90 in Cuba. Average male here is 78 years old, right? And they're supposed to have these quote problems. But to your point a second ago, 40% of city and county hospitals are privately owned.
Yeah.
So, like you said, if they're closing them, right? Because they can, because it's not a municipality, it's not so-and-so county hospital. They can close them, and now that person has to drive 50 miles and risk losing their child's life, right?
And the nursing home industry has become virtually all for profit. The dialysis industry is virtually all for profit. What do you think that their motivation? If you are on dialysis, you are a revenue center for them.
Right.
If you heard for a kidney transplant, you're no longer a revenue center for them. What do you suppose happens when you are on dialysis at a for-profit center and someone starts talking about possibly a transplant? Do they help you get there?
Right.
There's data about this. They don't. They would rather you as a revenue center, even if the definitive treatment of transplant is better for you.
Well, and I know for a fact that there's
then take care of a patient.
I know for a fact there's a voluntary benefit that is it's specifically designed. It's super cheap, but it's specifically designed to cover the transportation costs to and from the hospital. Right. So if you get that big ass deductible, $1,500 for the ambulance ride, if you're paying $7 a month to these guys, well, that $1,500 is covered. Right. If you need a helicopter ride, you're going to pay a little bit, but it's not the $3,000 helicopter ride. Why are we selling a benefit to cover transportation?
Right.
Right. Let me ask you something really quickly as we start to wrap up here. The herd of my people. When is that? Oh, good.
Tell a story before we finish.
Huh?
Great segue about the helicopter. I want to tell a story before we finish.
Oh, please.
Okay. So the book that I'm about to publish for the herd of my people starts with a story when I was rescued by a helicopter, a search and rescue team from Davis County, a public search and rescue team. I went on a hike. To make a long story short, I made a bad choice in terms of the path I took. I ended up and the people who were with me on the hike were all my children, much younger than I was. They were fine, but I ran out of gas at the end of the day and I had to be rescued. So I assumed that I was going to be billed for that. And after they treated me and they found that I didn't need to be hospitalized or transported to the hospital, so they let me go from the ambulance. I said, well, how can I be billed? And they said, no bill, no payment necessary. We do not want people to fail to call us because they're afraid of the cost. Wow. We want to rescue. We don't want to not rescue them. That in a nutshell is what we should be doing in American healthcare. We don't want people to not be rescued because they don't think they can afford it. That's wrong. We're paying for it anyway.
And that statement that he made is what keeps people out of the hospital, is what keeps people ignoring that lump, is what keeps people just guessing and going on Google and talking to their buddies versus then going to a doctor because they can't afford it.
People actually die of appendicitis in the United States because they don't think they can afford an evaluation for bellyache.
Oh,
what happens in the U.S. Nowhere else in the first world, just here.
No, I know. Oh, I know. I got family that live overseas in Europe, and they look at us like we're insane.
Right, we are insane.
We're insane people. So when is the herd of my people coming out?
I'm going to put a publishing date at August, I think, just before the election heats up in the fall.
Okay, very cool, very cool. And then the new article you got in the Salt Lake Tribune, when is that coming out?
Well, the editorial page editor wouldn't disclose the day, but it's supposed to be this week.
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, you shoot it over to me and I'll read it and I'll make sure I make it public as well.
Okay. You bet.
But well, folks, hey, listen, my guest has been Dr. Joe Jarvis. Again, he's the author of The Purple World. He's a practicing physician. He's also the author of the forthcoming The Herd of My People. Thank you for coming on, man. A lot of good information.
Hey, and enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Appreciate it. And anytime you want to come on, just, ring me up and something, you got to bug up your ass about something you want to talk about. Let me know. We'll make it happen.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. You guys. Hey, listen, if this stuff makes you uncomfortable, it's supposed to. Sleep tight.